Hi, I just wanted to do a quick kind of off-the-cuff video about some of the books that showed me the way to a lot of the cult movies that I've enjoyed over the past uh, 7 or 8 years or so. These are indispensable resources, these books, towards finding some fascinating, bizarre areas of cinema. I'm going to start off by talking about Leazoid Express. Now, Leazoid Express was a fanzine decades ago, back in the 1980s, that was released by the two people that wrote this book, Bill Landis and Michelle Clifford. And this is sort of a condensed version of all of the best aspects of Leazoid Express, and it spends a hell of a lot of time talking about movie after movie after movie of obscure releases that nowadays we're only just starting to see in the past 10 years. Really after Kill Bill was released, I noticed they started putting these out. Finally getting put on DVD. Now, the world that they're talking about in these movies that they're seeing is a vanished world. It's the world of 42nd Street, of the Deuce, of this row of movie theaters and porno houses and gay bathhouses and all sorts of really seedy, disgusting areas before Giuliani in the 1990s radically transformed New York. It was a very different city. It's a city that most people remember with a certain amount of disgust and dislike and distaste because, oh, there was so much crime and it was dirty and it was disgusting and it was a dying city and nobody really seemed to be able to do anything about it. There were Republicans, Democrats, everybody just let the city sort of decay for years and drugs took over and there was an enormous amount of crime in the city. However, this book uniquely looks back on that time favorably. It looks back on the time fondly, and I could see why they want to do that, living in this world where money did not run everything. Yes, there was an extreme amount of crime back then, but at least there wasn't as extreme amount of Wall Street crime and white-collar crime. There's probably, far more money that's been stolen by those rich fat cats who run everything on Wall Street over the past 10 years than there was in the 30 years beforehand with all of the petty crime. So it goes into great detail describing the world. It wonderfully, perfectly describes this world that I've never been to, but I'm interested in because I read about it here, of low-rent movie houses, of double features, of sitting there and watching movie after movie, of weird, low-budget, obscure films, of what the theaters felt like, of what it felt like sitting in them, of which ones were safe, which ones were extra sleazy, which ones you would probably get pickpocketed at. What movies were shown where, what the audiences were like in certain places, and it just really lets you feel like you were in this place roughly from pretty much for the counterculture, from the late 1960s to 1980, or maybe into the early 1980s to some degree. It's just the movies it talks about, it starts off by talking about movies in the sort of proto B-movie, not B-movie, proto-cult movie stage in the early 1960s, where it talks about, where before it became, started to become mainstream. It was never really mainstream, but by the 70s, more and more people were seeing these aggressive, violent, very sexualized movies. And it divides the movies into different categories, like there's ones with really violent horror movies, another one's about blaxploitation films, another one about Mondo movies. There's a great chapter about Mondo movies and all the various iterations they went through in the 60s and 70s. Another one about European films, part about cannibal movies. It talks about all of the wonderful films that we're only just getting to see now on DVD that were part of the experience of going to 42nd Street back then. I highly recommend this one. It's fun to just read, to experience what 42nd Street was like to someone like me who has never been there and who was born years after it was gone. There's only one problem with this one. I can't independently verify it because that would be pretty difficult to do, but I've been told by more obsessive movie buffs that there's a lot of inaccuracies in this book. The main writer, Bill Landis here, is not really considered by many other cult movie fans to be entirely accurate. Not that he's being deliberately wrong, but, in a few cases he says people are dead when actually they're not. They were very much alive when he was writing this. He makes a lot of odd mistakes about movies, maybe about years, about actors, about sometimes about characters. Actually, he actually talks about Dolomite at one point in this, and he describes Dolomite as being gay. Yeah, Dolomite wasn't gay. He was I mean, he did wear very flashy clothing, but he was a pimp. He wasn't gay. You get the impression that Landis is writing this entirely from memory, as if he's not like looking back and checking these things. He's writing them in a pre-internet age, even though this is the early 2000s. He's sort of writing them without the aid of the internet or going back to the actual movies on video or DVD and just sort of remembering what they were like. So don't look to this for hyper-accurate information all the time. There's some pretty glaring errors, although if you're not an obsessive movie fan, you're probably not going to notice. The next book, or set of books, is Cinema Sewer. This is actually very similar to Leazoid Express, in that Cinema Sewer is actually a collection of... is actually a magazine, and these books are just collections of the best of the magazine. The magazine is printed in Canada, in Vancouver, and it's still coming out. It's still out right now. This isn't an older-fashioned thing like Leazoid Express. The Cinema Sewer is a fantastic read. Looking through these magazines, and that's really what they are, more or less magazines in book form, is fascinating. And these books, I have to caution you, they're a lot more about pornography than just cult films like these ones. I'd say it's about 50-50. So if you're offended by some very graphic sexual imagery, I would avoid these. It's not like it's not like opening a magazine of Hustler exactly, because they're all cartoons, but they're still in there and they might bother some people. It does spend a lot of time going into classic pornography from the 70s and early 80s. It talks about John Holmes and Dorothy LeMay and a lot of other of these classic porn stars, and it's really interesting. Nancy Suter, one of my favorite ones. It talks so much about them. It's really, really interesting. But if you're just interested in the cult movies, you might want to avoid these because of the porn in it. But I think if you're into the really violent cult movies like I am, you're probably not going to care about the porn being in there. You'll probably enjoy it like I do. It does talk about a lot of really interesting cult movies, though. This is where I first heard about the movie Things, one of the most despicable and evil creations ever to come out of Canada. Which is really saying something. I'm going to review Things one of these days. I can't even say it's bad. It's just an experience, that you have to live through in order to understand movies. You can learn so much about film just watching that one. Things is a great film. There are all sorts of wonderful little things in here. There is talk about weird European cartoons. There's the person that produces this, Robin Boogie, is a cartoonist and a porn reviewer, and he makes his magazine. So there's also these wonderful drawings of different people, his interpretation of them, what they look like, a lot of classic photos. There is profiles of porn stars. There's collections of movies from Japan. There are wonderful little sections, like an entire section about Mondo movies, an entire section about footage of people actually killing themselves, the history of porn in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, a collection of women in prison movies. One of these has, I think it's this one, has like a collection of 50 reviews of 50 Golden Globus movies, and Globen and Globulus are not exactly my favorite movie producers in the world, but it's interesting to see that in here. There's a wonderful little part where it talks about the making of Manos, The Hands of Fate, one of the great MST3K episodes about the creation of the movie that episode riffed. There's so much fascinating stuff in here, and you're going to find something unique and interesting and probably sexy on each one of the pages. It goes into all of the different subgenres and subcategories, all kinds of obscure movies. If you don't mind the porn stuff, and I don't, in fact I very much enjoy it, you're going to like these, so I would check them out. I've saved the best for last. This one is Slime Time, a guide to sleazy, mindless movies by Steve Puchalski, who I imagine and hope and wish is Polish. I am part Polish, so I like to think that he is somehow. With a name like Puchalski, he has to be part Polish, right? This is a magnificent collection of crappy movies. It's got practically every obscure film you can find. I found so many bizarre films in here. I have found so many movies from so many different genres. There's an entire section that details like all of the Godzilla movies. It's got like 20 kaiju films in here that they talk about. It talks about Glen or Glenda, The Holy Mountain. It talks about El Topo too, Alejandro Jodorowsky. It goes into sleazy Mondo movies and really bloody cannibal movies, European films, South American films. It goes into all sorts of grim stuff. Combat Shock. This isn't where I first heard of it. This is one of the places where I heard about Combat Shock early on. One of my favorite horror movies. One of the best horror movies ever made, I think. It talks about biker movies. It talks about... There's even a section in the back where it details the genres. You know, it talks about the history of drug movies and biker movies and blaxploitation movies. If there was ever one place where you can find tons of very terse, well-written, and informative reviews of sleazy movies, it's right here. And they're written in a really interesting, funny way. It never becomes tedious. You can just read an entire chapter or an entire letter of this, and you're going to find a bunch of fascinating, interesting reviews. It's going to pique your interest in all the movies it talks about. This is the holy Bible of cult movies. If you want to find out about cult movies, get this book. This is where you want to go, where you can find all of this fascinating stuff about all of these movies. Oh, it talks about The Hand. Yeah, a lot of people don't know that Oliver Stone started out by directing two, I believe, trauma-made horror movies in the 70s and early 80s. And he does not like to talk about them because they're so terrible. Not that that was his fault, really. It has all of these... It talks about Last House on Dead End Street. Admittedly, Leazoid Express goes into better detail about Last House on Dead End Street, this legendary cult violent movie from the 70s. It is just one of the... Oh, this talks about one of the most terrifying documentaries I've ever seen. And this is the only place I've ever seen it listed, The California Reich, which I will have to do a special video on one of these days. The California Reich is made in the mid-1970s. It is about modern neo-Nazis living in California back then. Unsurprisingly, a couple of the children of the neo-Nazi family proudly say that they want to grow up to be cops one day, and I'm sure that they did. The Hollywood Chainsaw Hookers, It's Alive, It Conquered the World. This is just a magnificent collection of these movies, and I highly recommend it. There are a bunch of other movies, books about cult movies out there that are really, really good and really, really interesting. And of course, the 42nd Street Forever movies are great with that, with the collection of trailers, just to give you an idea of what movies that you want to see if you're interested in cult films. They used to have cult film sections in some bookstores and some movie places, but those went away. They kind of came out around at the end of Kill Bill, and you used to find things like that in Best Buy, which is going to confuse some people who've only been shopping at Best Buy over the past couple of years. But in the mid-2000s, early to mid-2000s, Best Buy had a little cult film section, and you could get a bunch of really interesting, obscure films there, but no longer. They just have the very standard, everyday, boring films there now, for the most part. At least the ones here in New Jersey, in this area, do. But if you want to find a collection of these movies and read about them and have fun and laugh and enjoy them, Slime Time, Cinema Sewer, and Leazoid Express are the way to go. This is a perfect primer. This is a great syllabus on cult movies, and I highly recommend getting them, especially Slime Time. Most of these are pretty cheap. They're not that expensive nowadays. A couple of the cult movie books are very expensive, and I haven't been able to get them because I can't find them on Amazon for less than $40 or $50. But these tend to be pretty cheap. I highly recommend getting these books if you're into cult movies.